Good evening, and welcome to the Sunday Roast, hosted by the Democratic Labour Party. This evening, we are going to be discussing our nation's health. And to assist us in that, we have with us, first, our spokesperson, Paul Gibson, who covers us on health. He is a pharmacist, and he also runs a business in the medical field. Welcome to you, Paul.
Thank you.
We have two Pauls with us this evening. Our second Paul is Dr. Professor Paul Browne, who is the Professor of Molecular Biology, University of the West Indies, Mona. He completed his PhD here at the Cayfield campus, also connected to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. He has been involved in research in public health related infectious diseases for the past 30 years. So he comes to us with a wealth of experience as we discuss our health environment in Barbados, particularly in light of the COVID pandemic and how it is impacting upon us. Welcome to you, Dr. Paul.
Hi, good evening, and thanks for having me.
Since we have two Pauls, that is how I will be referring to you, Dr. Paul and Paul, just so that we can know which one of you I am posing the question to. Yes. And Dr. Paul, as our special guest, I want to start with you because we need to set the environment and understand what it is that we are talking about. So if you could give us a brief synopsis, what exactly is COVID?
Okay, well, COVID is the name that is given to the infectious disease caused by the novel coronavirus, and that is SARS-CoV-2. And so far, this has caused about 2.4 million deaths worldwide. So coronaviruses are very small. So they have between about 26 and 32,000 units of code. And the SARS coronavirus 2 is about 29,000 units of code. So if you think about that, 1,000 units of code would constitute one protein. So it means that these viruses are actually very small in terms of what it is that they can do. Compare that to humans that have 2.9 billion units of code, and E. coli, which is a common bacterium that causes UTIs, that's urinary tract infections, and diarrhea in some persons, that has 4.6 million units of code. So these are very small. But coronaviruses have been around for a fairly long time, and many of them cause things like the common cold and other infections in other mammals, pigs, birds, whales, and so forth. So, but this one, because it is novel, it is causing quite a bit of stir when it first broke on the scene in December 31, 2019. And so far has caused several countries to go in lockdowns. It has caused quite a number of deaths, as we mentioned before. And in the initial phases, it was not confirmed that asymptomatic patients, for example, would be able to transmit the disease. But now we understand that upwards of 60% of asymptomatic patients who don't even know that they have the infection could actually transmit the disease. The disease has essentially three phases: mild to moderate infection, severe infections, which will land you in the hospital, and then critical infections, which will put you in the ICU, and this is where we have the majority of persons who will unfortunately demise. So in a nutshell, if I could start with that, the common symptoms for COVID would be high fever, tiredness, dry cough, shortness of breath, and in several persons, there is a loss of taste as well. I want to use those as the opening salvo in terms of what it is that we're dealing with as far as COVID-19 is concerned.
Thank you. Now, you spoke of some very common symptoms. So over to you now, Paul. High fever, dry cough, shortness of breath, and taste, loss of taste.
Yes.
As a pharmacist, would you agree that these are fairly common symptoms for several different ailments? And
yes.
How do you, from your end, deal with the issue?
Yes. Well, I'm happy to let you know that pharmacists happen to be, we talk about frontline, many times before people even go to see their doctors, they would come to their pharmacy. And this is why pharmacists are all trying to be vaccinated now, the ones that are being vaccinated, and are trying to make sure that they wear their PPE and so on, because they are really the front line in many cases. And we are the ones many times that refer them to their doctors, or refer them to, or you can do an evaluation as to whether it's dengue or they need further assessment and tests. And for the most part, many persons come in saying they have runny nose, they may have joint pain, they may have loss of appetite and so on. And these are indicators for us that they are in that, they may potentially have coronavirus, in which case we would do what we do best, which is to refer them to the centers for testing, encourage them to go see their physicians. We've had situations where persons in the earliest stage of COVID-19, where when we would refer to physicians, the person would come back with a prescription as if they had a viral infection. But with time, what we saw is that the doctors were saying, no, these symptoms are connected with COVID-19, and would do the necessary steps in terms of testing and escalating it to Harrison's Point, and now some of the other facilities. So yes, we've seen the increased sale of things like Panadols, sinus medications, and different things in this season, because initially people believe that they have rhinitis or sinusitis or whatever. But with COVID, we are no longer playing with that, or no longer assuming that they have the flu. The first automatic thing is to tick the box that they do not have, that they're not COVID positive. And then we will do that through the systems, through the physicians, and so on, and through the clinics, the polyclinics at the moment. But these, up until last night, I had a situation where we had to assist someone who, again, was having really bad pain. They were giving all the different symptoms that you described: muscle pain, headaches, nausea, and everything. And we had to refer that person to get tested. So it's a normal, common thing happening in pharmacies. Right now in Barbados, unfortunately, we're seeing this too often, and it is very disconcerting. We're not very happy about it, and we believe that really a lot more should have been done earlier in terms of the matter of locking down and this kind of thing, because it would have stymied where we are at right now on today, the 14th of February, 2021. I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
You're muted.
We have heard a lot in the
Okay.
media about vaccines and the use to assist in curbing or corralling COVID-19. But again, I want you to start from the beginning, because we're looking to educate this evening. Tell us, what is a vaccine? How does it work? And how, in particular, with relation to COVID-19, the vaccines that are on the market are expected to address this pandemic?
That is for me or
Dr.
for
Paul.
Dr.
Dr. Paul.
Yes.
Okay, so the primary goals of vaccines are to prevent infection. And by doing this, we're talking about a sterilizing or a neutralizing immunity. So it means that we want to get something into a person that is going to prevent them from having either the infection or a severe form of an infection, which could be life-threatening. And we have several of these that are commonplace. And maybe part of the thing that person need to remember is that most, if not all, children are vaccinated and considered fully vaccinated by the time they are about 2 or 3, given the WHO requirements. So that is one. The second goal is to prevent disease. So now we're talking about perhaps an attenuated infection. So the person might, having been exposed to the agent, might develop a mild infection, but then it stops at that point. And the third goal, which a number of persons have really been talking about in relation to COVID, is reduced transmission. So effectively, you want to break the chain of transmission by reducing the pathogen burden and the risk of transfer. That means that once somebody is vaccinated, they, on the one hand, will not come down with the disease. On the other hand, will not be able to transmit the virus or the bacterium, since we're talking more generally about vaccines, in case they would have been exposed. And there are several vaccine preventable diseases that are around, and the world has benefited tremendously from the advent of vaccines and the use of vaccines in the population. Measles, mumps, rubella, pertussis, polio. We could call several success stories that we have had over the years with respect to vaccines. And there are several different kinds of vaccines that are in use. This would include those that are live attenuated, such as the polio or measles, mumps, rubella, varicella zoster, yellow fever, hepatitis, TB. They are the killed inactivated microorganisms, such as the salt polio, rabies, influenza, hepatitis A, pertussis, and these doesn't need refrigeration. Then there are purified subunit vaccines, such as toxoids for tetanus or diphtheria. It might include subcellular fragments like for Haemophilus influenza B. And there might be those that are produced by recombinant DNA technology, such as the hepatitis B surface antigen. I think where the one that has grabbed the imagination of the world, which was the first ones that came out for COVID, was the genetic vaccines, and specifically the messenger RNA vaccine, which now persons have argued whether it is safe, given that it is so different from all of the others that we have known before. And in fact, what this is units of code, as I mentioned, codes in relation to how many codes the coronavirus will have. So what we're talking about is the fact that one unit of code, 1,000 units of code, which is going to give you one protein, is what is the formulation for a messenger RNA vaccine. So for example, for the BioNTech vaccine, we're talking about a spike protein. that now will trigger the immune response in the person who is vaccinated, so that the body now, once they see that in the future, it will recognize it as the enemy, as COVID-19 coming in, and it will produce the appropriate defense, which is what it is that we want to generate in these persons. The other aspects as it relates to safety and efficacy, I can go on to that, but I just wanted to use that as a background to what it is that vaccines are. The other thing that persons will argue as well is the length of time that it would normally take to develop these. And it is usually over 10 years because of the extensive studies. But in the case of COVID, what we have learned is that it is not so much in terms of the physical time, the 8 to 10 months to get this vaccine to market, approved, ready to roll out. But the fact that it is over 10 years of research into cancer, into other things that, you know, scientists have actually been looking at developing vaccines using this technology and have thrown it into solving this problem. And in fact, has turned up to be very effective. In fact, more effective than some of the other vaccines that we are currently using, because it is usually acceptable that you have a vaccine between 50 to 60% effective for rollout. Now we are seeing something that is developed seemingly in a short time, but with over 90% effective. This is phenomenal. You know, it's not seen in many of the other diseases that we have to deal with. And so this is a huge advance, not just for the science, but for in terms of curbing this pandemic that has plagued us. And as I said, 2.4 million lives that largely, and Paul would agree, largely preventable, excess deaths, as they would call it, that were not absolutely necessary, you know, if I can term it like that. But, you know, these persons could have been saved, you know, so to speak. So I want to start with that, and then perhaps, Paul, I don't know, you might want to go into the other aspects in terms of the things to consider for vaccines, or I don't know how you want to go on the Verla.
Yes, that is precisely where Paul is to head next. So
Yes.
you segue very neatly into it.
Yes. Well, as a pharmacist, as you know, vaccines are drugs as well. And they're manufactured using the standard genomic science and so on in 2020, that is, 2021, where before you would, as Paul suggested, it would normally be 7 to 10 years to develop a vaccine. And you would have small animal trials, larger animal trials, large animal trials, then you get small human trials, larger human trials, and then going to a large human trials. What is happening with this vaccine is extraordinary. Two things are happening. One, the speed at which the vaccine has been developed is extraordinary, and it has taken two lanes. In one case, you have the Messenger RNA vaccine, which is new technology in the space. And then you have, on the other side, in terms of the Astrazeneca, the attenuated form of the vaccine, being made available very, very quickly. The reality is that one of the key factors in developing any drug is something called TIME, which is time, right? There's some things that you will not see until you have more time to observe and to witness. Whether things have an effect on your gene structure, whether things affect things like sterility, whether they affect your other organs, reproductive systems, and so on. And this is why they're actually about to start trials in kids, very young babies. Kids under 16 years old. They never had that before, but they're now setting up structures to have the vaccine tested in that grouping of kids. Now, for me personally, and this is personal, I would have wanted more time before I go into that grouping of patients, only because we want to see what developmental effects it may have. You want to see if there are any other spin-off happening in the human population, the adult human population, and you want to determine whether or not there are any, time still does tell us things. And we had products like that were introduced very quickly, and this is why in the pharmaceutical industry we don't rush to do things. There was something called thalidomide. You heard of thalidomide? It was made to have nausea in women that were pregnant and to suppress nausea and vomiting. And that went into widespread use as a drug. And over time, what they realized is that, yes, it was affecting the suppression of nausea and vomiting. But after 9, 10 or more months, they realized that, okay, people's digits were missing and some arms were missing and so on. And way back in the early 60s and so on, what they determined from that time on is that there were supposed to be a clear methodology for the development of pharmaceuticals and drugs such and vaccines and so on. That resulted in it was not the fact that it was the drug that was causing it. Yeah, sorry, it was the drug that was causing it. But the issue was that the dosage of that drug was too high. And now that drug has been put back into use after causing such a catastrophe. They realized that the lowering of that dose back to what you didn't go into what you call the MTD, which is the maximum toxic dose, right? In pharmacy, we used to go the maximum toxic dose, and they had to establish what the maximum toxic dose was. So as we jump back now into vaccines, we realized that vaccines have been used over the years to save millions of lives. Dr. Browne mentioned MMR, measles, mumps, rubella. We had diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis. Some of them are toxoid, some of them are attenuated, which means that you break off a piece of you take away the part that is infectious and leave the rest of the body of the vaccine, and the body will think that it is being attacked by the infected virus. And so, and that has saved millions of lives. We have the zoster vaccine, which is for a very painful event called zoster, which is secondary to your chickenpox infection. And for chickenpox, we have the varicella vaccine, which is very effective in suppressing chickenpox and developing antibodies and so on. We more recently had the vaccine to prevent uterine cancers in women and so on, and that's proving to be very successful. And in the long term, we're going to see tremendous benefits of that. For entering Africa and the African continent, most persons use the mandatory vaccine or the yellow fever vaccine, which you have to have before you enter Africa. Now, the point to that is that people are saying, are they going to make the COVID vaccine mandatory? Now, the reality is that we have precedent set in science where it is established that yellow fever vaccine is given before entering Africa. So we have that precedent set. So if it is nothing strange or new to the vaccine arena, right? So the point being is that vaccine has saved millions of lives. It is one of the best things that ever happened to mankind. We see it in the form of polio, where polio is a vaccine that's given. By the way, people think that a vaccine is only an injection, but vaccines can be administered through different modus operandi, namely the nasal passage. It can be given on the tongue. It can be given intramuscularly or through the deltoid area. But the reality is that at the end of the day, the objective is to boost and stimulate the immune system of the body to protect the body from the virus or the toxoid that is being focused on in the process. So at the end of the day, vaccines have been a tremendous benefit to mankind. People are not walking without legs now anymore. They're not paralyzed. And so it is tremendously value added. And that's the purpose of vaccines.
Thank you very much. Now I have my questions, but we're also getting some questions online. The first very interesting one is, can you get the virus after you have received the vaccine? And I will open that to either of you because I believe you're both qualified to answer that one.
Yes.
Right.
Response to Dr. Browne to that.
Yeah, right. Okay. Thanks. I'll take that now. So by getting the virus, I think the person might be asking whether you can get an infection and develop COVID. And in fact, for those, well, two things. On the first case, most of the vaccines that have been approved so far requires 2 jabs. And these are between 21 and 28 days apart. So clearly, after the first jab, you'll start to see antibodies developing over the period of about 7 days, and that might give you about 50% protection. You're really only fully protected after the second jab, and then hopefully it will develop long-term immunity. Now, so far, we are not sure if there is going to be immunity beyond about 6 to 8 months. We don't know that yet because we're still within the first year of vaccine development, especially in relation to COVID. And the other aspect is that with the variants that are developing, that is another complexity which we can deal with a little bit later. So that is the first the first thing off the bat to consider, that after you would have after you would have received the jabs, then you're not fully protected. You might still get the the virus and develop COVID. Now, the important thing to note, which is the second point, is that you will not get COVID from the vaccine. So the vaccine is not able to cause somebody to get the virus from the vaccine. And that is important to note because some persons think that because they have been infected post-vaccination, that it is a vaccine that has caused them to get sick. And so that must be cleared up, that the vaccine is not going to transmit COVID. And neither will testing do that as well. And just to add that in for good measure.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. Now, what are the different types of COVID? We keep reading about them. I'm not speaking about brand, but the different types of methodology that is used to produce the vaccines that we're seeing coming forward in relation to the treatment of COVID-19. Dr. Paul?
Well, so far, I think there are about 6 vaccines that have been recognized. I don't want to say approved because approval means, within a particular jurisdiction. So recognized by the WHO. There could be a 7th, what is that? And the Janovax. But there is the Oxford Astrazeneca. There's which is a viral vector vaccine, which has up to 90% efficacy. 2 doses are required. There is the Moderna, which is a messenger RNA vaccine, efficacy 95%, 2 doses are required. There is a Pfizer BioNTech messenger RNA vaccine, 2 doses are required. There is a Johnson & Johnson, which is really a game changer in the minds of a number of persons. So even though this is less effective than the others, well, so far in terms of the estimate, only 1 dose is required. There's a Sputnik 5, which in the early days was one that appeared to have been rushed through by Russia, but now is recognized as legitimate. 2 doses are required, and this is adenoviral vector-based platform, which means that it is using this coating, so to speak, of a DNA vaccine to deliver the viral or the protein component into the body to generate the immune response. And then there's the Sinovac, which is an inactivated vaccine, which is more traditional to vaccines that you would have been familiar with. This uses dead COVID-19 virus itself to trigger the immune response, and 2 doses are required for that. So those are the major ones that are available now, and they are being distributed in various parts of the world. Clearly, PAHO hasn't cleared some of these for use, and certainly they wouldn't be a part of the COVAX facility, which countries like Jamaica and Barbados would have signed on through PAHO.
Now, Paul, we want to hone in now on the Oxford Astrazeneca brand of the vaccine, because that is the one that we have been informed is on island now and being used. Now, those of us who have been paying attention to international movements will note that outside of the UK, there is some pushback coming against this particular vaccine. Can you first explain what the pushback is? And then I'm going to ask you very directly, can there be some political reason for it, or is it justified? So first tell us what this pushback is, the reason for it, and then give an opinion on whether it is justified or politically motivated, and sometimes it could be both.
Right, well, the Astrazeneca vaccine, as you know, hit a bit of a bump in the road in South Africa, where they had what you call the South African strain, which has shown a decreased efficacy, and the vaccine has shown a decreased efficacy against that particular strain. As I understand it, that is not yet available. That has not been seen in Barbados as yet. We did see in Barbados the UK variant strain here in Barbados. And again, we know that more of the newer cases, which will be affected because of its infectivity, it is more commonly seen here in Barbados. It begins to be seen more in Barbados. And for sure, we don't know, or we haven't seen that the vaccine is not efficacious against that particular strain. But we did see that in Switzerland, in Spain, and a couple other European countries, that they have literally said no to the AstraZeneca vaccine, based on the variant strains and so on that they're seeing coming about. Without getting too technical, the fact of the matter is that it is a case where you have, this is I'd like to use, this is a thermometer for testing for temperature, but pretend it's a virus, right? This virus is made with the a part of the COVID virus vaccine. It is deactivated. It is not infectious. But what happens is that you have another strain of the virus which has, let's say, an attachment like this on the top of it, right? Just a simple thing. But because of this addition to the structure of the vaccine, also of the virus, you find that the vaccine is not as effective because of just by adding this. And so what happens is that this is the virus's defense against or the evolution of the virus because of the addition of this. And this may cause some vaccines to be resistant or not as effective, or not as effective as if you did not have the variant strain. So I'll remove this. So we go back to our original strain of COVID. And so this is where the issue is coming. And this is why I mentioned the word TIME, time. There's some things that will not happen unless you have time. Dr. Browne mentioned that we are not sure whether the vaccine will last beyond 5 to 6 months. As a matter of fact, when it first started, AstraZeneca said between 90 days to 120 days. Now, with more time, we're seeing up to 6 months. And the reality is that when you give the first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine, you get between, well, nowadays the studies are showing between 52 to 72% coverage. What happens with time is that the levels begin to drop, and you give what you call a booster, which is what is called the second dose. Now, this is very, very important for the Astrazeneca vaccine. We have a number of studies that indicate that if you give that booster dose early, the first 2 weeks, that your levels are below 80. The science, I'm happy to let you know, is suggesting that if you wait 4 weeks, or between 3 to 4 weeks, and give that booster dose, that your immunological response is above 80 and is much, much higher. So we are advocating that after you get your first dose, don't go back 2 weeks or 3 weeks, wait at least 4 weeks, and you get your best clinical response to the vaccine at that time. So it's very important to remember that. Don't go back too quickly. The later you take to go back, the better the vaccine will work for you. I'm happy to let you know that, okay? So I hope I answered your question. Did I miss anything, Pete? Paul?
Well, the other part of the
Second
question
part.
was the political part, but
Political
just to say as
yeah.
well that so waiting too long as well will have the effect that you don't want to have. I mean, so things have gone down so low that it is almost like restarting the process.
Exactly.
So so timing is everything. So you can delay it, but certainly if you're talking about 5-6 weeks afterwards, then you're gonna have a problem.
Correct.
Where you may have the political, it could be quasi-political, it could be just bungling, because there haven't been efficiency in terms of vaccine rollout. Yes. There isn't that kind of system that are put in place to ensure that those persons who would have received their first dose will have their. I think that is part of the failing that we have seen in so many countries, that and so it's not so much about the fact that they don't want to, but because the systems are so inefficient that it now is a complete disaster in terms of covering the population. Yes, Paul, over to you.
Yeah, and yes, Verla, and you mentioned the political part. The point is that the reality, and you may or may not know that I was the vaccine business unit manager for the Caribbean for GlaxoSmithKline, the largest pharmaceutical company in the world. And I've managed a number of vaccine campaigns across the Caribbean, different cultures, different currencies, and so on. And one of the things you realize is that if a government does not have enough funds to get that second vaccine here on time, you would have wasted the entire front end of the vaccine. Well, sorry, you would have compromised the vaccine campaign. I will say that you would have compromised the vaccine campaign. And internationally right now, we're seeing where there are currently not enough vaccines to even cover the big boys like the USA and Canada and UK. There is a big fight going on to make sure that there's enough capacity to get a second dose, not only for the Astrazeneca vaccine, but for the Moderna vaccine. The other thing is that vaccine business is commerce, it's business, it is business. And so there's a competition, there's a fight to see who gets it there first and who gets the information up first and who makes the most money and so on. It really is, as much as people are saying it's a humanitarian and benevolent act, it is also a business for them. So they want to make sure that there's no litigation. So they tell you when you take the vaccine, you say that they're not liable because it didn't go, it only went to phase 3 trials and then go to some of the phase 4 trials. And so they're not liable for some of the outcomes that may occur. So that's the other part of the whole vaccine game that is going on. But I'm happy to report that AstraZeneca has always been known to be a very ethical company, and so is Pfizer. And so the reality is that they have not really been given enough time because of the pandemic to take the vaccine through the paces that it would normally go through under normal circumstances. Now, I'm hoping that there's enough funds to continue the vaccination program. I know that in the first instance, there are 45,000 vaccines to be given in Barbados to frontline workers and to some elderly. It is not for the wider Barbadian public. And if you're trying to receive 65 to 70% herd immunity, and as the name suggests, you have a large grouping of the population hitting a number of, between 65 to 70%. For other vaccines, it is higher, like polio, it goes up to 90%. But for this particular virus, they are using 65 to 70% rate. So once you reach that number, it means that fewer persons will come in contact with other persons that have the coronavirus, and it will be thwarted within the context of your population. So that's the destination. For that to happen, you must have an adequate supply of vaccines. Now, what is significant to this is that if you have a vaccine being given every 6 months, or sorry, because you don't know how long the vaccine is going to last, you're now waiting for that data to make sure that you can enter that into the equation to ensure that you are doing proper management and of the process to make sure that when it is time for that second vaccine, that it is here, that you have enough funds, and that you're not fighting against the other countries in the world that are trying to get their vaccines to their people. So we still have some evolution and some things to observe as we go forward with this whole vaccine process. The vaccine is not the cure-all, right? The vaccine is not the cure-all. It is part of the process, and the process must work for it to be efficient. While the vaccination is still going on, it must be said that you must still hand wash, you must still wear your mask, and you must still sanitize your hands while the campaign is going on. You cannot now stop doing that because you would not have achieved herd immunity as yet.
Thank you. Now I want to backtrack just a little bit because both of you, Pauls, mentioned something that I want to zero in on. Dr. Paul, I'm going to ask you to answer the question. If it is that the second dose of Oxford Astrazeneca is not in Barbados in time, can you use a different brand in order to receive that booster?
Okay, I was muted. Thanks for that question, and that is actually one of the things that is actually being suggested. That yes, in fact, since the platforms are similar, once you have a vaccine available, then it can be used. So that's the first thing. The second question, which is related to that, is that a person who would have had been infected with COVID before can still receive one dose of the vaccine. And so that would ensure that even if there was not long-lasting immunity based on the infection that they would have had, the vaccine would actually boost that immunity, and so they would have better protection. But the formal studies for the mixing of vaccines are actually being done. So we should have those, that data available as to what, which ones work best together, to have that as part of the pool of information that can advise countries, Ministry of Health, and the general public.
As a follow-on, are there any available now that are similar to the Oxford AstraZeneca?
Well, the Oxford AstraZeneca is a viral vector. The only other vector one would be the Sputnik, but
Actually, Russian, yeah.
Yeah, but I am not sure if it is now advisable. I haven't seen any of the manuscripts that suggest that cross-platform would have the same kind of effect in terms of boosting. But theoretically, based on what the vaccine is purported to do, then it should follow that if you have some immunity based on a particular, and using the argument that the infection could be used as a first exposure, and then a jab, would be the second or booster, then theoretical that will work. But I haven't seen anything that suggests that cross-platform is a straightforward process. But certainly the phase trials that are going on will actually give you that information, and we'll be able to definitively say whether, which platforms are more compatible, or is it that all of them, irrespective, can be used.
Thank you very much. Now, Paul,
Yes.
we know, because we have thanked them, that we have received some doses of the vaccine from India.
Yes.
India is not one of the locations where the virus itself, I beg your pardon, where the vaccine is being developed. India is where it is being produced.
Yes.
Is there anything that is stopping us in the region, specifically in Barbados, from also becoming manufacturers of the vaccine?
Yes, I love that question, Verla. I'm happy you asked that, because I wrote a proposal in 2020 to the Barbados Labour Party, because this is Barbados and health is really not supposed to be political, right? It really is not supposed to be. But I wrote a proposal to the Barbados Labour Party where I suggested that Barbados use some of the old plantations that we have. We have a lot of plantations that are property of the Crown, where we have many, many acres. And we have the capacity right here to have the space, it is a safe environment, where we can have approval for FDA-approved plants right here in Barbados to be manufacturers of vaccines. I also suggested that we could have some of the technocrats that live far and wide, that are trained, that are Barbadians, that want to come back home, that are doing this in other jurisdictions, and come back to Barbados and actually be a part of that process of developing the scientific and the developmental and manufacturing part within the pharmaceutical space. I think we have the expertise to do it. I think we have the capacity to do it. And because of now building relations with people like Africa, I am suggesting that, when the Democratic Party is in the government, I hope we do this, because no one else is doing it. Because it is, if you're losing $500 million in tourism, $600 million in the tourism product, you have to find alternatives. And this represents a significant turnaround or alternative. Another leg, we have a one-legged stool right now, which is tourism. And that's been amputated. So things like a vaccine manufacturing plant or a drug manufacturing plant is something that we could certainly consider. We look at the African continent, who's always needing things like anti-malarial drugs and antibiotics and so on. And 6% of the imports of products into Ghana, for example, are counterfeit, talc powder. People just go and just get powder, pack it in a tablet and send it. So people are thinking that they're getting antibiotics or medicine, and they're getting nothing. And it's killing millions of people. As a matter of fact, it is believed that the fake drug trade earns more than the drug trade itself. It's a very, very sad thing. So to your question, Verla, it is something that we should look at. We should find the 10 significant products that are used in the landmass of Africa, for example, and manufacture those, and we will make much more than what we make in tourism. The second point is that India, people give India a bad rap, but India makes more than 70% of the world's pharmaceuticals. In terms of, they have many FDA-approved plants in those locations, and they get knocked. And mind you, there's some counterfeit as well. But when you get an FDA-approved plant, you can get very high-quality products. And we're thankful to the government of India for allowing us access to that product. And the reality is that quite a few drugs are made and come out of India in nowadays. and they're sent to Europe, Canada, USA. They're consumed worldwide. So they have ratcheted up their whole level of technology and expertise in that space. And it is something that we are more than capable of doing in Barbados. We have the land, we have the personnel, we have the intelligence, and it is really a space that we should jump into. It is the last, health is really the last frontier. And we should certainly get to the front of the line in that regard.
Thank you very much. Now, let me go back to the questions from our viewers. And one that I believe that a lot of people are concerned about. What about side effects to the vaccine? And how would you even know if you are allergic to a vaccine? Dr. Paul, can you assist us with that?
Right. And this is actually going back to almost the start of the talk in relation to vaccine goals. And one of the two things, maybe three things to consider, but among the first things to consider is the efficacy and so can it prevent illness? And in preventing illness, will it actually cause the person who has received it to have these side effects? So on the one hand, we know what it is that it is supposed to do, but then a vaccine is a combination of several different components that are mixed together, as many drugs are. So you have inert aspects that ensure that things stay together in the formulation that is developed. So generally, persons who might be allergic to one or other of those components could actually have these kinds of allergic reactions. And we must remember that, these are not anything new. So for example, those persons who would have gotten a jab of penicillin back in the good old days when you had to, stay with your nurse for about half an hour just to ensure that everything was okay. We'll remember that, it is something that is normal, so it's not an issue. I think part of the challenge is perhaps with some of the other stories that have been broadcast on social media, that persons are even more apprehensive. But pain at the site, a fever, etc. Those are common things that persons who would go in for vaccination of children would see these things. They are told to carry, the Panadol or thing because they might have a fever immediately after vaccination, etc. The other one, which perhaps is actually more serious, if you want to call it that, is what we term in immunology as the anamnestic reaction. Big word, but basically it means that the immune system is giving this exaggerated reaction. Perhaps that person was previously exposed to the virus, didn't have any symptoms, don't know. They now get vaccinated, and there is this big immune response, which actually can put them, in serious health risk. But I think the healthcare workers should be, if they are not already advised and educated about observing persons who would come in for vaccinations, what are the symptoms to look for, especially with certain persons, whether in terms of history taking, they would have had any allergies before, any allergic reactions to previous vaccination. Those things actually help in terms of developing or establishing a risk profile, so that yes, you will have to stay with me for another 15 minutes just to be sure that things are not going to collapse, and you're going to have some seemingly life-threatening reaction to it. So I think all of these are manageable within the context and we have seen these things before. It is not new.
Yes. To that point, Dr. Browne.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, the reality is that people don't realize this, but I mean, pharmaceuticals or medicines, any pharmaceutical medicine can have a reaction on different people. I mean, it happens. Even with Panadol, you can have a side effect, right? People don't realize that if you take too much Panadol, you can actually damage your liver. If you overdose on Panadols continually, it can affect your liver, right? But that's a different topic. And the side effects are nothing strange or uncommon. The worst thing you could possibly get with the vaccine is what's called an anaphylactic reaction, which is what Paul mentioned. And this is why they ask you to sit for between 15 to 20 minutes. And there's usually an EpiPen available to inject that person in the event that they reach that very augmented stage of a reaction. But the matter of fever, chills, tiredness, headache, pain at the site of injection, these are all things that are normal with MMR vaccine, diphtheria vaccine, Engerix B, which is a hepatitis B or hepatitis A vaccine. Tetanus gives you a soreness and stiffness in the muscles and so on. So having side effects with vaccines is nothing strange or different. With COVID, it's the same thing. It is a war going on in your body when you administer any vaccine, whether it is MMR, diphtheria, tetanus, hepatitis A. You give that vaccine and the body goes into a war mode where they develop antibodies. And it is what you want to happen. Now, the extent to of that reaction to the body is where you would have a bit of concern. In the case of the anaphylactic reaction. With COVID, we have been hearing over the last couple of days when the vaccine started about muscle pain, about fever and chills. Don't be so strange. Don't feel surprised when you hear these things, huh? Because this is a part of the process. And what you want to do is to make sure that you have your Panadol, Tylex, Calpol. These are all things for fever and so on. Have them available. You take your cold showers just to help to alleviate the fever if you have one and so on. So these are side effects that you see with drugs. And I like to make a pitch for pharmacists at this point. I keep telling people, you can teach a monkey to count tablets. That's not what pharmacists do. Pharmacists are drug specialists. We spend over 4.5 years learning about all the aspects of pharmacology, pharmacokinetics, clinical pharmacology, and so on. I mean, some doctors spend 12 weeks in pharmacy school. 12 weeks doing pharmacology as a course, but we spend 4.5 years. So pharmacy is a very deep, meaningful resource to any pathology, information, and this is one of the roles that we play in the entire pandemic. And this is why we are all about teaching. We are patient lovers. We are patient lovers. And so we happy Valentine's. But we make sure that people know and are knowledgeable about medications. And if you are taking an antihypertensive or blood thinner or you're diabetic and so on, it does not preclude you from getting the COVID vaccine if you choose to do so at this time. So these are things that you can have conversations with your pharmacist about. The reality is that it is really good to get that vaccine, even if you are a diabetic or hypertensive or on a blood thinner. But persons now that have lupus and HIV and other type of immunological conditions, you would need to have a very serious conversation with your doctor about whether you take the vaccine or not. If you have lupus or if you have sickle cell or HIV or any of these other categories of pathologies, you have to make sure of diseases, you have to make sure that you have a serious conversation with your doctor about that matter, okay? And it's very important because you don't want to throw your immune system off balance or off kilter. And so if your white blood cell count is too low, or if your viral load is too high with the other pathologies or diseases in terms of HIV, then you may have a problem with the vaccine. And this is why you must have these conversations.
Thank you. So in short, if you are concerned, have a conversation with your GP.
Yes.
And follow your GP's advice.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
And you can speak to your pharmacist as well. But at the end of the day, if you have any of those diseases, make sure that you see your doctor about. It's very important. It can be a life or death situation. You know, I've had this conversation with the president of the Lupus Association. They did contact us and ask a question, and we were able to tell them do the reading and do the research on their behalf and presented the data for them. And so the rheumatologists and so on are also crafting a message in respect to this category of patients as well.
Thank you. Now, is there a sensible rollout plan? I know some countries, of course, have been concentrating on their frontline workers, but then they're coming down in age categories. Is there any international standard best practice that you should follow when administering this vaccine? Dr. Paul?
Well, I think the answer to that is not necessarily politics, although that is something that could be involved as well. So it is one thing to say that the frontline workers, those age 65 and over, would be front of the line. But if you have not worked out the logistics, how we are going to get the vaccines moved from the warehouses where they're going to be stored to the various vaccination centers, to have sufficient healthcare workers, persons in place to administer those jobs. Well, even before that, to have whatever the registration process is. And we have seen the kind of fiasco that has caused lots of long lines and frustrated persons across the world, not just in the US. Because it is one thing to say that is the plan, but in fact, that is not a plan. That is just a thought of how you want things to work. But in terms of now getting the things distributed, how many vaccinations can you do in a particular 8-hour shift, whatever the time frame is? All of those must go into the thing, or else it is just talk and it will lead to lots of frustration.
Yes.
And not to mention perhaps even wasted vaccines as well. And that is the other challenge as well, because if the vaccines, especially if it is something that should be refrigerated at a particular temperature, if once it is thawed, it must be used within a particular time frame. Beyond that, it is going in the garbage. And so I think it's a major challenge that the country must think about seriously if it is going to actually achieve the ends that it intends to achieve.
Yes. I think you're right, Dr. Browne. It is so important that you manage this process very, very, very carefully. I'm aware that there are people that are just walking into polyclinics right now getting vaccines. I mean, AC, air conditioning people, that are not necessarily frontline workers, just people, and people are all important. But from a national standpoint, the structure, the rollout must be managed very, very carefully, because you may have vaccines going to people that really don't need, are not supposed to be getting vaccines. And we're actually seeing it right now. We have to be very, very careful with it. I'm seeing that, I know that for example, when the bags are being given out, let's say, probably Dr. Browne, you don't know this, but there's a national food campaign going on where bags are being given out and so on. Unfortunately, we've seen situations where people that are not supposed to get bags are getting bags. Because they're for the hungry, the destitute, people are disabled, people are unemployed. But there are persons that are unemployed and working and getting bags to themselves, but they're not giving them to people that are needy. Barbadians need to share. And once you know that their needs and so on, you have to make sure that the thing is being managed properly. For vaccines, the same is true. You must be clear that your frontline workers your sanitation workers, your maids, your nurses, your doctors, your pharmacists, and persons that are directly interacting with COVID positive patients or asymptomatic patients. You want to make sure that that group of patients are adequately covered. There's going to be another tranche of vaccines coming. That will be to give your second dose, and hopefully it will be to give those a new entrance into the vaccine arena or into the herd vaccinations. And so it is very important that we are clear as to who is getting those vaccines on the front end. Managing, I'm happy to see Major David Clark as part of the process because he understands big picture management and so on. It's good to have people like that leading the process and our past chief medical officer and so on. So hopefully that would manage this process as to who get vaccines. Matter of cold chain as well, making sure that the custody of the product from stage to stage is being carefully managed. Because if you have vaccine that's not being stored properly, it is ineffective. It can be spoiled. So that is critical as well to make sure that the process goes very well, that the management of the actual vaccine product is very, very critical.
Right, and I don't know what is the state of the hesitancy, for example, among healthcare workers in Barbados, but I know that in Jamaica, there is a significant proportion of healthcare workers that have indicated that they will not take the vaccine. So granted, there is the rollout plan, and healthcare workers, among others, are at the head of the line. But then if they are not willing to take the vaccine, then there must be a plan B in place so that you have effective use of the doses that the country will have. I'm not sure what the situation is in Barbados. I know that we have had some challenges locally, and nurses have indicated that they will not be taking the job, even though they're on the front line and they see directly the effects of the pandemic. Fortunately, some of them have over the last couple of weeks changed their minds. So we are up to slightly higher percentage in terms of healthcare workers, but I don't know what the situation is in Barbados.
Dr. Paul, we are having a similar issue, and that actually was one of my questions a little further down the line. And can you explain to us what the real problem is with critical workers opting out?
Well, the reasons that they would give would be similar to what persons in the general population would give. They have heard talk about, the safety aspect, notwithstanding that, it is effective. Those are the major things, whether there is going to be some change in their DNA itself, whether there's some other adverse effects down the road which you're unaware of. It was developed too fast. Those are the usual things. So even though healthcare workers would be scientists of sort, meaning that they're following scientific principles in terms of administration of healthcare, they are still people subject to the same kinds of thought processes sometimes in terms of making up their mind based on information that they have at hand. And I think part of the rollout must be the communication strategy. How well are we communicating not just the benefits that are there, but if there is any risk involved and how those are going to be managed, etc. And do it in a transparent manner that persons feel that, yes, it is something that they would want to get engaged in for their benefit and for their families as well.
Thank you very much. Now, Paul, the media has posed the question: is there any concern that government will not be able to meet the financial requirements for the booster shots, that second round of the vaccine? And what would you suggest is the best next step should these vaccines show little to no effectiveness?
Okay. I'll do the last question first. I do believe that the vaccine will show effectiveness. I do believe that vaccinating Barbadians is really a step in the right direction. The science, as I said, I always keep saying TIME, we have to give more time to the evolution of the results and the side effects and the benefits and the immune levels and so on. That still has to happen. That's the reality. And this is why a lot of other healthcare professionals are kind of standing back a little bit. But the fact of the matter is that I believe that the vaccine will have an effect. How soon do we have to do it a second time? And how much will that cost? We're still not sure about that. And Dr. Browne, I'm sure you agree with this. We're still waiting on that finite number to say the vaccine gives protection for this amount of time. We're still waiting for that. That's the first thing. In the current state of Barbados, Barbados is in a very, very tough position financially. We have borrowed $1.6 billion in money, which we have to pay back. We have to pay it back. It's borrowed money. We are currently not doing anything to generate income as a country. We don't have any new industries coming. We don't have any international offshore financial situations or corporate banking or anything coming to Barbados in any significant way. So we are really living off as a country right now on borrowed money. And that money has to buy phones, buy oil, buy sugar, buy hair, buy whatever we want. That's that. So there's no additional money coming into Barbados at this point in time. We're also spending a lot of money on managing this particular COVID crisis. Lots of money. So will there be money available for additional doses of vaccines? Is that economic balancing act that we're going to do it, that we're going to have to do. We have the highest level of unemployment that the country has ever seen in its history. Well, from way back in the 60s, early 40s and 60s. I mean, we've never had unemployment levels in this country to this level. We've never had unemployment like this. People are suffering, people are hungry, people are jobless. A lot of people are. And so there's going to be a balance to make sure that those people are taken care of. There's going to be a balance of making sure that the vaccines are bought. There's a big balance in that going on right now. I mean, it is a very, very difficult situation. Everybody knows that in 2008, we had an international world crisis, which the Democratic Labour Party fought with and dealt with and faced up to. And we even built the best of Santos coming out of that. There's a lot of things that we did. We still paid for school, we still kept the school meals going and so on, even through the 2008 economic crisis. Now the Barbados Labour Party has their crisis, which is the COVID pandemic. And it is, they have the highest unemployment rate, they have the highest, there are a lot of people that are not going to school. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot going on right now. And to be honest with you, I'm sorry we didn't close earlier, like in January, because I'm sure that we would have been spending a lot less money at this time on COVID. If we had followed our COVID guidebook, which said, when you hit 35 cases per week, we close. That's what the instruction was. And unfortunately, that was supposed to happen in December and January, and early January, and it never happened. It never happened. It's unfortunate. And I think we would have had a lot less deaths if we had done that. Yeah. So to answer the question, this is a very tough balance. You can't be pandering to everybody. You have to make very strong, it calls for strong leadership to manage a COVID-19 pandemic, right? And we made some significant blunders as a country already, but I'm thinking that we together as Barbadians once, and I love what Corey Ford said last night. I mean, he's one of the champions of this this whole thing, the nurses and so on. But he said we as Barbadians individually need to take responsibility for this pandemic, because if we don't, and if we don't do what we're supposed to do, stay home, mask up, sanitize, what will happen is it's going to cost us more. So the question is whether we will have enough money to buy more vaccines is also on the shoulder of every single Barbadian, because you have to play your part in pulling back this train that has gone off tracks. The train is right now off the tracks, right? And it is very unfortunate. So the question is whether we will have enough money to buy more vaccines and so on is really dependent on how we manage this going forward. Do we have to borrow more money to add to the current money that we have to pay back in 2035? Because what's going to happen is that this government may not be the one that will be taking care of the payback. They've actually structured it in such a way that they've kicked it down the road so that whoever comes later, your grandkids and so on, will have to pay for it. But in this vaccine crisis, we have to be very, very prudent and careful as to how we spend this money. The Democratic Labour Party had their challenge in 2008, and we managed it. The Barbadian Labour Party has this COVID crisis in 2021. I mean, this is why you don't really kick people when you think they're, because your turn comes, and unfortunately, this is where we're at right now. And I'm just thinking that we really have to be very careful and very prudent in our fiscal management, because whether or not people get a second vaccine or a third vaccine, or we get a donation, is really dependent on how much money we have. And it's not going to get any cheaper, I don't think. That's my response to the media person, whoever asked the question.
Thank you. Dr. Paul, the thread online is abuzz with one question almost predominantly. What is the makeup of the Oxford Astrazeneca vaccine? What is in it that they should know about?
Well, and in fact, I just responded to the question online as well. So I think one person might be suggesting as to what is the source of the antigen that is used, that it is from chimpanzee. But the AstraZeneca contains a viral vector, which is really a part of the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. And this is what is packaged in the surfactant, which is something that holds the thing together and ensure that it is stable long enough that when it is injected into the person, will have the desired effect. So it mimics how the virus will look, but all it has is just a spike protein. And it must be specific to the virus that you want to protect against, or else it will be ineffective. It must be what you want to have protection against. And so that there would be stabilizers, as you have with any other product that you'll make. You want it to have a reasonably long shelf life, and then it has a diluent, like saline or sterile water that you're going to be using to dilute the vaccine. And so those are the components. So, when we talk about allergic reactions, we're talking about any of those components that might be there. So it could be somebody is reacting to the stabilizer that is used. And stabilizers would be something like what you put in ice cream to ensure that the milk doesn't separate away from the cream, and you have this consistency in the product. So that is one of the best examples that I could probably have give in terms of how the stabilizers will work. And I think we have lost
no, she's still there.
Oh, okay, yeah. So so to answer that,
you
there are
lost me.
Oh,
my video, my camera seemed to have gone
haywire.
Crazy.
Right.
So I just turned it off. That's probably the best thing to do it now.
Okay.
I'm still here.
Yeah, so there aren't any hidden ingredients that are in the vaccines. So the only thing that would be different in the different vaccines would be what constitutes the antigen. What is it that the body is going to see that is going to tell it that, well, this is the information that we want you to have, that you can be protected. So that is the difference in terms of the different platforms.
Right.
They seem to be calling for the scientific terms, because they're saying that still doesn't say exactly what it is made from.
Well, we'll get back. I just wanted to answer a question that somebody was asking about. We keep asking about this mandatory vaccine thing. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes.
Right.
That's coming up again.
That's coming up again. No, the reality is that we have something called the Constitution of Barbados, and there are certain protections that we get under the Constitution of Barbados, right? You realize that the Rastafari community has instructed or suggested that they will not be taking the taking the COVID vaccine, right? And that's their right to do so, yeah? They have a right to do that. There is no mandatory, there's no law currently written on our statute books, and I'm not a lawyer, you are, Verla, but that mandates that you can have something put into your body that you don't want into your body. Even for school, there are parents that have decided that they don't want their kids to get vaccinated. Very sad about that, but because of, for whatever reason, and there are some legitimate cases where you can't get vaccines, but they're few and far between. And so the whole matter of a mandatory vaccine is something that keeps coming up, but I don't think that we will go there. I think people have a choice. They have a choice to take or not take the vaccine. You are trying to achieve a number of 65 to 70% to achieve herd immunity. And if you go beyond that, that's great, that's lovely. But the reality is that taking a vaccine is still a choice. And if you're waiting just to get a little more data and then take it, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If you are a healthcare professional and you understand the science and you're comfortable and you want to take it, you go right ahead, that's fine. But the fact of the matter is there is really no gun to anybody's head to say you have to take the vaccine. I mean, the police made their case very clear. Some of them have taken it, and very bold officers have gone in and they've been getting vaccines all week. And there are others that have said, you know what, let me just hold off. The same thing with nurses. You don't have to take it, but if you think that you'll be compromised by working in an environment where you'll be exposed to Covid-19, you should really give it serious consideration, knowing that you may have to have another vaccine in 6 months until we get the results in terms of the immunological data and the other findings and so on. But the reality is that you will be protected. It is not mandatory. You don't have to. It's not by law. The government is not instructing you that you have to do anything. It's really your choice. And really and truly, it's really best for you to read up, understand, learn, and then make the decision. I think it's best to make an informed decision when you make it. You don't want to be forced. You want to read up, be comfortable with the information. And if you want information, you can contact the Office of the Ministry of Health, or you can write us, and we have some literature that we can send out to you from the Democratic Labour Party. Just we can make that available to you. So just contact us, and we will get that to you soonest. Okay, but it's not mandatory.
Right. I just want to add, descending into the arena and forgetting that I'm the moderator for the night, that the legal ramifications cut both ways. You have that constitutional right to choose, but every single right in the Constitution has exceptions. One of those exceptions is where it is for the public good. So we have to remember that. Having said that, in order to meet that public good requirement, there will need to be legislation. So it would have to be legislated that it is mandatory.
Yeah.
We know that there are some vaccines that are mandatory. In relation to our children, they have to demonstrate that they have had certain immunizations before they can enter school. So it is a process that we are unfamiliar with. It is just that it is now being overlaid on adulthood, where we're making choices for ourselves as opposed to the state making choices for our children. The second legal consideration is that whilst you get to make your personal choice, others also get to make their personal choices. And when I say others in this case now, I want to bring it home to travel. An airline, just like it can say you cannot get on board without a mask, they have, because it is their aircraft and they have liability that flows from that out of the Warsaw Convention. That is too much information right now, but they have certain liabilities that they take on by allowing you on board. Part of those liabilities are to protect others from you if that comes to the case. We mostly think of that in terms of one passenger going berserk on board. But in relation to one passenger becoming infected, they may well carry some liability. And it likely will be open to airlines to decide that you can't travel on their craft unless you are vaccinated. Similarly, just like you need a yellow fever vaccination in order to travel to Africa, you need a malaria vaccination to travel to certain regions. It is open to individual countries to determine that you can't enter their borders unless you are vaccinated. So these are considerations. Whilst you have your personal rights to decide not to take the vaccine, others have a personal right not to deal with you because you have not taken the vaccine. So we have, it's a balancing act that we have to play off. There will be, of course, nervousness because we're dealing with something new. There will be medical issues because, of course, we're dealing with pre-existing conditions before COVID was overlaid, before vaccines were overlaid. So there will be considerations and valid reasons for not taking the vaccine for some people, but then it may well limit how they interact with others because they too have a similar right to decide.
Well said.
I hope that answers the question because that really was a query that was coming out of the chat as well. Now, another question, and from the media again, after taking the vaccine, what next? Will we still need to wear a mask? Will we need to have another vaccine again? I believe that one was answered before. What really is the way forward after vaccine? Dr. Paul?
Well, the important thing is once the vaccine starts, then you try to achieve herd immunity. And that is critical if you are going to put a dent in the cases of COVID. Now, I'm glad that there have been success stories from some countries. And in particular, I'll mention Israel.
Yes.
Now, 40% of the population has been vaccinated. And they have seen, as of the 5th of February, within 6 weeks after shots were rolled out, 90% of older persons, those are 60 and over, had received vaccination, and they're using the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. They have seen an immediate reduction of 41% in confirmed infections and 31% of hospitalizations. That is huge, for a vaccine that persons would have questions about. And these hospitalizations have been between mid-January and the time of the report in Nature. For persons who are 59 years and lower, it wasn't as great because, you know, less of those persons would have been vaccinated. They have seen a 12% drop in hospitalization and, sorry, no, 5% drop in hospitalization and 12% drop in infections. And for the 59 and lower, only about 30% of that population had been vaccinated. So there are tremendous benefits for vaccination. Now, if you don't have if you don't have hospitalizations, if you don't have critical infections, you will certainly eliminate mortality. And this is something that must be said repeatedly. You have your mortality, especially for persons who are hospitalized and have critical illness. And so once you have an effective rollout, you will have significant reductions in those numbers. And certainly you will be curbing the spread of the disease. And also, even though we haven't been discussing it beyond South Africa and the UK, less chance of more infectious variants developing, which will compromise the process. So I think it is important that we understand that we need to get on board as far as the vaccination is concerned, because there is more good that will be achieved based on the process.
That is excellent news, something that we can look forward to having results of a similar nature here in Barbados. Now, I want to change the conversation ever so slightly and speak about the incursion of COVID-19 into our health institutions, particularly into the QEH. Paul, if you can address that for me, please. The issues that come out of having allowed it through the doors, and then what next for us in getting ahead of that situation? You're still muted.
Apologies. Yes, can you hear me now? Yes. I'm aware of the fact that the QEH, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, had made a very critical decision very, very early on at the start of the pandemic, where it became a no COVID zone, no surgeries. I mean, you might probably remember the conflict about whether to have surgeries in the hospital or not in the hospital. That was that they had put a stake in the ground saying that there were to be no surgeries in the hospital. They were doing temperatures, sanitizing, and doing significant screening of their staff. And they almost went an entire year almost COVID free. The QEH consists of Barbadians that from all walks of life, all stages and strata. And the reality is that COVID has permeated every space, every strata of Barbadian. And so it meant that as much as the QEH had their metal shield up and had their guidelines up, and Dr. Cave had said, you know, this is what we're doing. And they did a very, very good job in keeping it off the wards for over, I would say, almost over a year. They had a couple of tricky situations where they had to get staff out and so on. And so they were able to preserve a very pristine and sterile environment. However, once you got above 5% in terms of the number of cases in the country, Verla, it became very, very difficult for that metal barrier to remain up, and for not to have cases of COVID permeating the ward structure, the A&E department, the MICU department, and so on, the social work department, whichever departments got COVID, I'm not sure, but I'm sure from what I understand, quite a few persons were COVID positive in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. They tried their best, but it was inevitable that this would have happened because COVID is very infectious. It is finding its way into many bubbles or many homes. And when a child goes out and play, and this is why the community needs to be a part of the solution, because once a nurse goes to work and works all day, wears her PPE, wears her gloves, wears a mask and everything, and goes back home, and the other family members are outside lining on the block or going to the supermarket and not wearing a mask, not washing their hands and so on. She comes home after, in utmost good faith, to be protected, and becomes exposed. Well, what happens? Goes back into an environment where the people are sick, and it gets spread in the hospital. So the reality is that they tried their best, but it was very difficult to keep it out. And it was going to continue to be difficult unless we get the number down. Right now, we are in some crazy numbers for COVID in Barbados. It's really not good. I haven't heard anything about an extended lockdown yet, but you know, it wouldn't be surprised if I hear it, because of the difficulty that they're having to thwart the numbers. The numbers are not looking good. And when you're going above 13% and 12% and so on, it is really, really not good. As a matter of fact, when you hit 5% and you go over 5%, the train is pretty much off the tracks. So it is really important, if we don't want to remain closed, that we have to pull it back. And the QEH and the workers at the QEH, they tried, but they had a very, very rough time keeping it out. And they are still having a rough time because they keep having infections. And the other issue that we have in Barbados is that the results from the Best Santos lab are coming back way too late. I mean, I know of somebody that was at home positive with COVID. They were told that they were coming for them on day 2 after hearing that they were COVID positive, and they waited for 13 days. They went up to, they waited so long that they went up to Harrison's Point and were released the following day. And it happened again today. So it's happening over and over and over. So you're having people that are positive remaining at home. And if you have somebody that doesn't know their COVID result and they're positive, and their mother's a nurse or their family's a nurse or whatever, they will automatically take it back to the workplace because you can't get the results back in time. Right now, the system needs a plumber. The pause is supposed to be the plumber to clear the blockage, but it is really not happening at a way and a rate that it is supposed to happen. I think only up until recently, they were able to get the daily rate, the daily test rate, and the daily positive rate, because you can't manage a pandemic without having those critical numbers. You need to have your 7-day averages. And if you were managing this pandemic without proper daily numbers, you weren't managing it. So what happened in the QH was inevitable. It would have happened anyway. It's happening in all the supermarkets. I don't want to call it names. It's happening in shops. It's happening everywhere. So the pandemic is really affecting Barbados in a very bad way right now. Many Barbadians are positive. Some of them know. Many of them are waiting tests that are taking very, very, very long. I mean, unless you have certain names and so on, sometimes you don't get your name and you don't get that result in 2 days. I'm aware of persons that are getting results in a day or 2. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know how they're doing it, but there are 2 Barbadoses, and we have to be very careful of that. We have to be careful of the 2 Barbadoses. It is something we have to be very, very careful of, because some people are getting the results in a day or 2, and other people are waiting 5, 6, 7 days. I know one person that lived in Canada that came here, was tested, and waited forever with her 81-year-old mother. It was heartbreaking. The entire family was stressed because they did not want to give their mother COVID, but because everything was taking so long to get the results back, it became a big problem. And I'm sorry to say, but we had more deaths as a result of what's happening, of not getting tests back on time. It is a mess. So the QEH, yes, is being affected, but everywhere else is being affected as well because of the issue. Somebody needs to take the bull by the horns in terms of the testing process. Get the bull by the horns and fix this. This needs to be fixed. It is a total mess, and we need to fix it.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Paul, we hear continually about the linkage between the non-communicable diseases and the instance of COVID, or at least the experience with COVID. Can you talk us through that linkage? And also, can you speak to us about that morbidity factor? And then Paula will come to you with a different angle on the same question.
Yes.
Right. Good question. I think there are two sides to this. One of them is the fact that because of the restriction in movements, most of the persons that would normally be managing their comorbid, hypertension, diabetes, cancer, etc., most of those would have been visiting their doctors routinely. Now, because there is this focus on COVID, many of those services have been curtailed, some of them canceled. And so, you can't keep your 2 month, 3 month appointment as you would normally have done pre-COVID. That means that those persons are going to be not properly managed and would be more likely to have adverse outcomes if they develop COVID. That's the first thing. The second thing, which is related, dovetails, is that many of the persons who go into severe illness, which requires hospitalization and ventilation, are also those that have comorbidities. And this has to do with what is happening physiologically in the body, in the tissues, in terms of they being able to manage, effectively to fight off this viral infection, while at the same time the body is trying to cope with uncontrolled diabetes or hypertension that is not properly regulated. And then COVID also has the additional effect, even in persons with mild infections, that the virus or the immune response seems to affect heart muscles. So
Yes.
those persons are going to seem to, out of the blue, develop complications related to heart and cardiovascular issues, even if they were otherwise healthy before. So it's a mixed bag, and it really exacerbates a problem. Between Barbados and Jamaica, I think we're running races here for who will top comorbidities related to diabetes and hypertension. We think our values are very high, and you will think that you're on top of the Caribbean. It is not an enviable position. COVID, I think, has exposed quite a lot of weaknesses in the system, where these are not properly managed, and is as if the health system is so overwhelmed in dealing with with these issues that some of the the other things that they would normally be managing well, those have been dysregulated, and so it is actually causing mayhem in the system. That's what I want to say. So
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. And now to you, Paul.
Yes.
Wearing your political hat, I want you to speak to me about the effect of health, our health system, the effect on our health system in relation to ailments not related to COVID, given that we are spending so much time and so many resources on the COVID struggle. What do you see and what do you anticipate in relation to the rest of our health system, given our myopic focus at this point?
Yes, I love this country a whole lot, and I love Barbadians. And unfortunately, we are called the amputation capital of the world. I know, Paul, you said that Jamaica is probably higher than us, but or maybe we be back and forth. But Barbados has a high level of NCDs, non-communicable disease, communicable disease. And right now, we have our lasers focused on COVID. We also have a situation where nurses have not received hazard pay, and there is almost a quasi-strike going on right now. Barbadians may or may not be aware of that. And one of the things that's happening to many Barbadians that is really saddening my heart, and it's not necessarily nurses' fault, but the nurses not at work because they're striking for a cause. They're being asked to work with COVID. They're being asked to give vaccines. But there are many elderly people with wounds and injury on their feet, on their toes, lacerations that need to be dressed. And they're now being given packs in the middle of COVID to go home and dress their own wounds. They're being given packs to go home and dress their own wounds. Now, dressing a wound is a specialty. It's a specialty, and nurses are special. Nurses are special, and doing a wound, you have to know how it smells. You have to be able to assess the color. You have to look at the depth of the wound, whether it is granulating properly, whether it's the right color in terms of granulating from the bottom coming out. If it's a wet wound, if it's a dry wound, I mean, pharmacists know about this as well. But these are all factors that the average granny or laborer or whatever will have not a clue about how to dress a wound. And with all the attention going to having nurses for vaccination and having the hazard pay issue, and it's justifiably so, nurses not being striking or being at work, we now have Barbadians who are left to do their own dressings. And I can tell you, we may have some very, very sad stories. You talk about amputation, capital of the world. If some of those wounds are not captured and dealt with properly soon, we're gonna have a lot of challenges. Infection or secondary healthcare costs or tertiary healthcare costs will be elevated. We will end up spending more money on health. And we don't have it to spend right now. We have borrowed money. We've borrowed money to run this country. We don't have money to spend. But it is very important that people's feet and that injury is dealt with, that wound is restored and is dislocked if it needs dislopping. Sometimes the color, the smell is infected. You know, these things need to be managed. You need a nurse. Nurses are important. And we need to make sure that we are not leaving all the other NCDs, people's pressure, you know, being able to take pressure, right? I would also encourage at this time, if you, and for those listening or those managing households, it is very important that you go and visit your pharmacy, make sure that you have your hypertensive medication, your diabetic medication, because if these things are out of control at this time with COVID, you can have a worse outcome because of that diabetes and that hypertension and so on not being controlled. So it is important that you take your medication. You get your medication from your pharmacy, you take your medication the way you're supposed to take it, make sure that your pressures and your sugar levels are where they're supposed to be, so that would also help to strengthen your body and rally through COVID. Get your vitamins and get all these things in place, your zinc, your vitamin E, and so on, and vitamin D to help to boost your immune system in the midst of this COVID pandemic. So I'm imploring you, if you're not getting your dressings done properly, if you're not taking your vitamins, if you're not being compliant, you would end up having, putting a greater burden on the system. And for those that do catch COVID, you have to also be very careful. And this is where you also need to make sure you're wearing your mask, washing hands and sanitizing. Because if you do catch COVID, one of the things that can happen is that, as Dr. Browne said, you can have cardiac repercussions, lung issues, circulatory issues associated with it. You get plugs in your lungs from COVID. And these are all things that put additional burden on the health system of Barbados. So I'm imploring and calling on the government of Barbados to make sure that they make nurses available to do those dressings. Don't just focus on vaccines and COVID. It's not about COVID alone. When COVID comes and COVID goes, you will still have people, and you don't want to have people having their legs and their arms removed because of gangrene and different things happening. It is a big, big concern. It is a tremendous concern that I have. It hurts my heart. It really does.
Thank you very much. Dr. Browne, I'm drawing now not on your microbiology experience, but your experience for 30 years in public health relating to infectious diseases. Now that we have community spread in Barbados, should we be doing more random testing? house to house?
Well, yes is the short answer, but I think it's going to come down to cost and which test you're going to be using, because there are different kinds of tests, and they give you an answer based on the staging of the disease. So, for example, if the person is not having any symptoms, then an antigen test might not be relevant. An antibody test might not even be relevant either. And an antibody test could actually say that somebody had the disease rather than is having an active infection. So a lot depends on what kind of tests and the cost. PCR would be the most accurate, but that is too expensive to be used in a kind of wholesale random way. Although testing and large scale testing is important, given the limitation of the tests, I would advise that it be used appropriately so that you actually get meaningful results. I wanted to actually piggyback on something that is critical to the whole discussion. We have mentioned it before, but it follows on nicely from what Paul was saying in relation to the challenge of, dealing with issues at home, multiple comorbidities, etc., is a mental health aspect. Because all of these things, so notwithstanding, the risk of contagion and the fear and all of the other stuff that are happening, when persons start to see some of these things happening to them inside their own homes and they have no recourse, that plays on their minds, that affects them in a significant way. And these are just those that have these comorbidities. Not talking about those who would have lost jobs, who would have had pay reductions, who would have seen their whole world just collapse around them. So that is another critical area that have to be looked at in relation to this. And sometimes it falls by the wayside. Somebody you need somebody. Normally you would be meeting persons face to face, a hug, that sort of thing. Now all of that is gone. And if you don't have bandwidth, don't have data, you can't see the person that you're talking to. And text messages don't cut it in these times, when you need that reassurance or that comfort to know that, yes, you can make it. Yes, together. It is a major challenge. And I think something that enough attention is not being focused on in relation to the pandemic.
Yes, thank you. I think we need a whole other conversation on that mental health aspect, because believe it or not, we have run out of time. So I do want both of you to give a wrap up, but to give it around this last question. Is there anything that we can do as the public to stop us from catching the virus and to protect ourselves? Dr. Paul, you first as our special guest.
Right. Well, absolutely. I think all of the methods, the protocols that have been established have been shown to together limit the spread and protect persons. So hand sanitization, wearing of a mask, and even though I think it was the CDC that was suggesting double masking, in fact, that might have other challenges, but wearing of a mask, one that is going to be well fitting, and physical distancing, limiting your interaction with persons that are not in your immediate households. Those are the things that have been scientifically shown to reduce the spread of COVID. And so I think, and so even as vaccines are rolled out, because it takes some time to achieve herd immunity, which means about 70% or so of the population being vaccinated and covered, then we will still need to maintain those protocols. But the other important thing is, so while we are talking about physical distancing, and personally, I don't like social distancing, we need to maintain all of the social contacts.
Yes.
And in fact, emphasize those even more now, because we are social beings, and we need those if we are going to, make it through this and come out stronger on the other side of COVID. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul?
Yes. COVID kills. And we had 7 deaths in 2020. 7 deaths in 2020. We've had about 17 so far for the year, a few days into the year. And it is a very serious thing that's happening in Barbados. Barbados are wonderful people. And when they understand what's happening, I mean, they respond. Corey made an impassioned plea last night to have Barbadians wear the mask, physical distance in terms of making sure that you don't find yourself at the wrong shop or you block all in gathering up in one another, and to wash your hands and to sanitize your hands. It's not only about sanitizing, but sometimes washing, give your hand a good old wash. For singing, while you sing happy birthday twice is a very, very fundamental thing. But because people are dying because of COVID, they're going to see their maker a lot faster than they expect. A lot of people, it's not as sobering as it should be. It should be a very sobering thing. People are actually dying. And because of that, and if you love and care for your family members, you would take this time, suck it all in, and abide by the protocols for the next couple of days or beyond, so that we can bring the numbers back. A couple of weeks ago, we were walking all over Barbados. We were having a good time. We were moving around. It's a beautiful thing. That's what you want. That's normal. So we want to get back to normal. But if people continue to behave in a way where they're not wearing masks and not washing their hands, and even in a lockdown, not social distancing, even at the beach, people are all over each other when they're supposed to be distancing themselves. It is very important that we commit to this for the next couple of days, because we're not Israel. We don't have the level of vaccination yet, where they've seen a 40% drop and a 30% drop respectively in their cases and deaths and severe illness. We are still at the beginning, and I'm encouraging, imploring Barbadians to follow the instructions. It is for your own life. It is a life or death situation. We want to get people back to work. Too many people unemployed, too many people hungry, but it will not happen unless we decide to obey and follow the guidelines. That's my contribution to that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those who joined us online for your keen interest and participation. I apologize for my camera disappearing in the middle of it all, but we continued nevertheless. Extra special thank you to Dr. Paul Browne for joining us from Mona campus of the University of the West Indies and lending his expertise to the discussion so that you can make an informed decision on whether or not to take the vaccine. Thank you very, very much for joining us, and see you again 2 Sundays from now. Have a good night.
Thank you, Paul Browne. Yes, Verla?
Yes.
Yeah. We're off?
Not yet.
Facebook still on.